Hi, welcome to the Elle Russ Show, where I deliver content intended to inspire, educate, and motivate. Engage with me online at elleruss.com and on social media. Enjoy the show. Hey, Dr. Jockers, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Elle. Really great to be on with you.
So we're going to talk about a couple of books you've written in your experience and maybe jump all over the place on some medical topics, some health topics. But first of all, let's talk about your journey as a health professional. What got you into this line of work? And then what led you into sort of the functional medicine-ish arena versus sort of staying mainstream?
Yeah, it's a great question. So growing up, my mom actually was a nurse, and then she just saw a lot of things she didn't agree with in nursing, and she ended up becoming a midwife and a massage therapist and eventually a naturopath. And so I grew up, whenever somebody got sick, we did chicken soup, lots of garlic, things like that, herbs. She grew a lot of her own herbs and things like that. So I just grew up around it, and I was an athlete growing up, and I got really into fitness, and I became a personal trainer. And I was eating, 6 meals a day, had to have like a protein shake before I went to bed, and then wake up in the morning and had to have like a big bowl of oatmeal with peanuts and whey protein and all kinds of stuff. I was eating at one point like 5,000 plus calories a day to try to maintain my weight. And I ended up developing irritable bowel. And I would have bouts of just bloating and cramping, intense pain in my gut, constipation, diarrhea. And
let me jump in there on that irritable bowel. So from what I've heard from other people, I'm wondering if this is your experience. Is it like one of those things where like, you don't know when it's going to happen? Like it kind of creeps up on you. So it's a little bit of an emergency thing. I mean, I've heard people talk about it where they've said, if they had to drive 40 miles, they would like pre-map out where gas stations were in case. So like, how did it manifest for you?
Yeah, for me. So fortunately for me, I didn't have like explosive diarrhea. Like I do know people that do deal with that. It was more of the constipation based, but once I got things going, and I would use laxatives, of course, and stuff. And then it would be, I'd have to spend a lot of time on the bathroom. But yeah, I would wake up oftentimes in the morning, just intense cramping in my gut. And again, I was eating all these calories, just trying to kind of push food in. So that was really at the point where I was like, I have to make changes. And I started reading a book that talked about, a grain-free diet, different things like that. This is way before paleo diet came around. This is in 2004. And so I started making.
Do you remember what book that was or who was talking about it?
Well, there was a few books. The first one I can't remember exactly, but then I read The Maker's Diet by Jordan Rubin. And that was a big book. And then I actually had started graduate school to become a chiropractor. And a friend of mine there, when I had just started, turned me on to Mercola.com. And he was obviously talking a lot about grain-free diet at that period of time, 2004, 2005. So I started following that and felt significantly better and started gaining some weight back, because I had actually dropped from 170 pounds to like 135, 140 pounds. I had lost a lot of weight. I had orthostatic hypotension. I go from sitting to standing. I would be really, really dizzy. I didn't have as much energy or stamina or anything like that. And, when you're 22, 23, you kind of just push through it. And that's what I was doing. But as I made these diet changes, I felt significantly better. And then I was taking 7 a.m. classes. I was going to graduate school, and I just realized I actually felt better when I didn't eat breakfast. And so I stopped eating breakfast and I started drinking a ton of water. So I was one of those guys that would have like a gallon jug of water that I would bring around with me. And I would drink a gallon of water between the time I woke up and noon. And I started putting all this weight back on, this muscle mass back on, and I was stronger and healthier in the gym. My energy was better. My mental clarity, I was at the top of my class. I just felt so good. And people were asking me, what are you doing? What are you doing? And there was I had never heard the term intermittent fasting. And I thought it was the water. I was like, I'm drinking a gallon of water. Like it's the water. And, and I'm sure the hydration was good. And it was definitely cleansing me and clearing me out and helping me be regular. But, that was really where I was at that period of time. I thought, wow, this is just drinking all this water. And I'd work out oftentimes, in the afternoon, and then I would break my fast and I would eat a ton of food in like a 4-hour eating window. And it wasn't intentional. It was just, I was waiting until my natural hunger signals kicked in. And it was usually around like 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yep.
And then I would get so hungry and I would eat until like 7 o'clock at night, and I would eat so much food, but I felt so much better. My bowels were regulated. My skin was clearer and cleaner. Everything about me, my whole disposition was changed. And, it wasn't until years later, actually, that I found out, really about 2009, the term intermittent fasting. And I was like, you know what, that's exactly what I've been doing. And so ever since then, I've been researching it, creating a lot of content around, nutrition, functional medicine. And that's that as a chiropractor. So I ended up graduating, opening a clinic, but I knew I wanted to do a lot of nutrition work as I was going through school. And so I opened a clinic. I started seeing patients for chiropractic, and also teaching nutrition, functional medicine in my community, and taking a lot of advanced nutrition and functional medicine courses postgraduate, and started creating a lot of content online. Eventually sold my clinic, and really now just educate people online about functional medicine, about reducing inflammation in the body, about how to use tools like, an anti-inflammatory nutrition plan, getting into ketosis, intermittent fasting, extended fasting, different strategies like that.
So you mentioned your sort of natural, you would like were fasting, sort of didn't know what you were doing or what it was called. And then you sort of, would get hungry around 3 and then, eat within that window. So first of all, I guess we should probably clarify with the audience, if they're unfamiliar with intermittent fasting, when he says he's eating from 4 to 7, that doesn't mean it's every minute of those hours, right? Like, yeah. But you're eating sort of as much as you want, whenever you want in that time. And I just give it credit where credit is due here. Really the guy, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Ori Hofmeckler. He wrote the Warrior Diet. Very similar, years ago, very similar, like minimal throughout the day, mimicking sort of that ancestral, like, hey, we'd be out all day. We wouldn't be stuffing our faces. And then we'd sit by the fire and have a not long, nice meal and go to bed. And I had a roommate at the time who started doing this, again, way before we even knew these terms. And it was so working for her. And at the time I thought it was a little bit crazy, and then of course, now I'm pretty much doing that. That kind of is the way it works when you get into this, that you end up kind of having that main meal, assuming you're waking up before 8 a.m. or something, you're having that main meal around 3. I kind of follow that same too. So let's just get into some of these things. The reason you were feeling so good and you thought it was the water, but it was the fasting. Can you explain to our audience why all the good stuff that's going on when we're not eating, whether that's touching on autophagy or some of the other things, explaining it in sort of third grade terms as to why this is a positive thing we should, attempt every now and then if we don't go to a regular schedule with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, to start, I'll just talk about really some of the science behind how this healed my gut. So number one, first and foremost, when we stop eating, it's kind of like taking stress. I mean, we're taking mechanical stress off the gut. It's like if you have a sprained ankle, the last thing you want to do is walk and run on your ankle. You need time to allow it to heal. And with the gut lining, my gut lining was so damaged. I needed time to allow it to heal and rebuild. Now, the good thing is the gut lining heals a lot faster than cartilage, right? Than your connective tissue. And so literally, and there's rat studies that show within 24 hours, you get a significant stimulation of stem cells, which are these young embryonic cells that are more stress resilient that take place in your gut. So these sorts of fasts, because your intestinal lining will replace itself every 3 to 5 days. And so fasting really triggers the production of healthier, stronger, more stress resilient cells in your body, and particularly in your gut lining. So mechanical stress is reduced. I'm stimulating this process of autophagy, where the body breaks down these older, damaged cellular metabolites, right? Or cellular organelles, mitochondria, for example.
And can we, let's dive a little bit into that for a second. So how can we imagine this, for example, like non-science brain, really, I mean, sort of theoretically science brain here, but thinking, I'm trying to figure out a way for the audience to understand it. Like, is it because the body, again, this is a dumb third grade way of explaining it. Maybe you can clarify it, but it seems as though like with an autophagy, I guess I would look at it like the body's not busy dealing with food right now. So it's going into what? Cleanup mode? How does it like, how can we personify the body here for a minute? Is it like, ooh, we're bored. Let's go look for some damaged crap to flush out. Like, can you know what I mean? Like how is that getting triggered and how does that work?
Yeah, for sure. Well, the body's either going to be in a building state or a cleansing, healing, and rebuilding state. And so when we're eating, we're triggering this hormone insulin, and insulin tells the body to build, right? To reproduce cells. When we're not eating, insulin goes down, and now it tells the body, okay, now it's time to repair what's happening within those cells so that they're more efficient and functioning better. And whenever we have a damaged cell, there's really three things we're going to do with that cell. We're either going to reproduce it, which is not a really good thing. It's kind of like making a copy, making the 300th copy of the original copy, right? It starts to blur. And then if we just keep making copies, we can't even, it's no longer legible, right? And so this is what the body does as long as insulin's elevated. We just keep reproducing. Even damaged abnormal cells or cells we call that are senescent, meaning that they're aged and they're very dysfunctional. We just keep reproducing those. So that's one thing we can do. We can also basically just destroy the cell, right? We call that apoptosis. The cell, it's kind of this cell suicide approach, which is an effective way to get rid of a damaged cell. However, it's also very energy demanding, and there's also a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress that occurs. So it's not really the preferred way for dealing with damaged cells. The preferred way is actually this process of autophagy, where we're cleaning up, we're taking the damaged parts, we're breaking those down within the cell, keeping all the, waste basically within the cell, and then taking those raw materials and creating new healthy cellular organelles, new mitochondria, right? New proteins that the cell needs to be able to function well. It's the most energy efficient way to really heal and repair those cells. And so that's really what our body wants to do. It just needs the right environment. And so when we stop eating, now insulin goes down. So insulin's kind of the signal. It's like the master hormone. When it's elevated, it's telling the body, reproduce these cells. When it goes down, now we're in an environment where we can heal and repair these cells. And that's basically what happens there with autophagy.
I love that. That's a great explanation. Thank you for clarifying that. Most people have been listening to me for years on the Primal Blueprint podcast before this one. We've talked a million times about grains, but and I'm sure you know this. Look, a bowl of oatmeal is not going to kill anyone. I mean, if someone has an autoimmune disorder, that would not be a good choice, maybe. But it seems like I'm laughing already about it, just because oatmeal is the one thing people just can't fucking let go, right? They are like, okay, well, but I still the oatmeal, for the fiber, for the heart health. Like they're still holding on to that grain sometimes. Can you explain for the people out there why grains aren't the best choice, why they're unhealthy in your opinion? I think both you and I know gluten particularly can exacerbate or ignite antibodies in people with autoimmune disorders. But other than that, just for the general population, why is it something we need to think about removing?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, everybody loves that kind of warm, cozy feeling of oatmeal. And I grew up eating it on a regular basis, but even when you eat that, even if you don't have a sensitivity, let's say you have a very strong gut lining, you don't have a sensitivity to the gliadin proteins, right? So there's a number of different gluten containing or gliadin containing proteins. And so some are marked as, gluten and some are not, but they're all kind of in the same family. So even if you don't have an immune reaction to it, let's say you feel like your immune system tolerates the oatmeal well, it's still a high carbohydrate food, a high net carb food. And that means that over time, when you eat that, you're going to secrete more and more insulin. And really in our society, especially, after, you might need a little bit more insulin when you're a kid, or if you're a high level athlete or something like that for periods of time. But for most people, after you get into adulthood, your main goal is actually keeping insulin pretty suppressed throughout the day, right? Certain times where you may want a little bit more, but we don't want to be telling the body to build. We actually want to be telling the body more signals of repair. So that's a big element of it. Plus, oatmeal really doesn't have, so whenever you have higher insulin and higher blood sugar, you are telling the body to burn fuel and create energy through glycolysis, right? Or breaking down sugar. And the byproduct of that is free radicals and oxidative stress. Now, to clear that up, you want antioxidants. So like in nature, when you have fruit, for example, fruit elevates your blood sugar, but it also provides a ton of phytonutrients, a ton of bioflavonoids and, different compounds that help your body deal with the oxidative stress. Whereas when you're looking at grains like oatmeal, you have something that's going to elevate your blood sugar, but you don't have antioxidants there to help buffer the oxidative stress that's going to occur as a byproduct. So whenever I'm thinking about nutrition or the nutrient content within a food, I always think about anti-nutrients. And so, there's a number of different things that we could talk about when it comes to anti-nutrients. There's lectins, there's oxalates, with grains, you have enzyme inhibitors and different things like that. But one main one is just things that elevate your blood sugar. When you get too much of a rise of blood sugar without having anything that helps promote insulin sensitivity and helps reduce oxidative stress in combination with that, then you're going to have issues. So if you're going to have the oatmeal, throw a bunch of blueberries in there or put cinnamon on it. So there's some different strategies you can do to add in antioxidants, but just kind of consuming a bowl of oatmeal in itself is going to have that deleterious effect on your blood sugar. Even though we're told it stabilizes your blood sugar, it's actually what we call a high glycemic load food, meaning that it doesn't have a high glycemic index. So it doesn't cause like a huge rise in the beginning for most people, but it causes a sustained rise of the blood sugar, which the person feels more satiated, but the whole time their body's producing a higher level of insulin. And again, insulin's telling the body, reproduce these cells. Insulin, when it's elevated for a period of time, it's also triggering more inflammatory gene pathways in the body. So we actually want our insulin levels to go down between meals. So like an hour or two after your meal, you want your insulin level down. You don't want your blood sugar up and your insulin up to try to get the sugar into the cell. You want your insulin going down because you want to have bouts. Your insulin's always going to rise when you eat food. Even if you eat, just a steak, you're going to get some level of rise of insulin. It's going to be very mild. And then you want your insulin to come back down to baseline. With eating something like oatmeal, it comes up and it kind of stays up for several hours while it's dealing with that continuous release of glucose into the bloodstream from the oatmeal.
Yeah, it's funny. So I'm going to call out my mom here on this podcast, but my mom, who's love of my life, but she, when you're a health coach, no family members ever listen to you, you tell them about something for years. And then until they see Dr. Perlmutter on a PBS special, like no one believes you. This is a classic story of anyone, trying to help someone in their family. And my mom's very healthy, but anyway, she did Weight Watchers. That works for her. But every morning it's a big bowl of oatmeal with blueberries and cinnamon and the thing. And, recently, I've been trying to tell her about collagen for years. And of course, until one of her friends is like, oh, I'm taking it, so I said, she goes, well, what do? I want to try collagen. I said, okay, well, so I sent her some and, I sent her some collagen with hyaluronic acid in it. And she starts putting it into her oatmeal. I said, just put it into your oatmeal every morning, it's unflavored, you won't taste anything. Just throw it in there. Well, not only within the first week was she like, oh my gosh, the crepey skin on my arms is like 80% better. But she also noticed that she wasn't ravenous by the time 11:30 came around for her to have her lunch. And, isn't that interesting, right? Because there was something extra satiating about the collagen that she put in there that helped her later on. But if we just turn it on its head and remove the oatmeal, this is where, like, if you are going to eat a breakfast, you know what I'm saying? There are certain choices. If I were to eat, I don't eat breakfast, but if I were to, wake up, have coffee a few hours later, if I even ate like 2 ounces of beef liver, let's say, oh man, Dr. Jockers, I'd be going strong for 10 hours that whole day. Like the satiation level of that, the energy sustaining of that versus the oatmeal 2 hours later, now I'm hungry and my blood sugar's dropping. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
So it's just so interesting. So if you are out there and you're eating oatmeal, maybe you need to throw some protein in there. Maybe you need to throw some collagen in there if you're still unwilling to give it up.
Yeah, 100%. I would totally agree with that. that blood sugar stabilizing effect of adding in some protein, maybe some healthy fats in there. A lot of people will put some butter, grass-fed butter in there, something like that, will definitely help. So that will help just keep you more satiated, but you're still getting this kind of high glycemic, or I should say high glycemic load. Not, again, when we talk about glycemic, people are thinking of this kind of rapid increase in blood sugar, and that is not good. However, things that can actually be even worse are actually kind of this slow release, but over a prolonged period of time, keeping insulin elevated. And so that's kind of what where most grains and particularly oatmeal fall into.
And that's also where the sort of the philosophy behind the zone diet at the time was, right? Like, oh, keep that insulin up there and steady and eat 2-3 hours. What a disaster that was. So you've got the Keto Metabolic Breakthrough and Fasting Transformation as your books. Before we get more into fasting, let's talk about keto for a second. Oh man. So many people, including myself, when I initially tried it, you make a lot of mistakes. People don't realize that you can get fat on a very low carb diet or fat on a keto diet if you're eating way more fat than you're burning. And so I think a lot of people don't understand that. They may also not understand some of these other caveats I'm sure you talk about, like the importance of salt, or, maybe even exercising at a different level when on keto. But I guess I would, some people are, should I not? It's not necessarily for everybody. I do, I live a low carb existence. I'm primal, fat adapted, but I have to watch it with keto because I will, for me personally, like N=1, I just don't like the level of fat that I gain when I'm doing it. And I have to moderate that. You find out for yourself what your fat threshold is, what this is. So I know you've had so many people come to you with all these confusing things. Is keto really right for everybody? I mean, I kind of say, all right, if you have never done it, I think once in your life, it's a good state to get into so that maybe you can be metabolically flexible and experience that for the first time. But are there people that shouldn't do it? Or give us some of those, these pitfalls and some of the objections around this, or also maybe some of the dogmatic stuff too, right? Like there's people that are like, I'm keto, this is what I've defined it. And then they're just like afraid of eating an apple. And you're like, come on.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we know that nutritional ketosis is basically a physiological state. And so it's a physiological state where your body is actually good at burning your own body fat. And the interesting thing is pretty much almost all the cells in your body can use fatty acids as a fuel source. However, your brain, your blood-brain barrier, you can't get these kind of long-chain fatty acids over there effectively enough to fuel the brain cells. And so the body, because our ancestors would go through periods of time of famine where they didn't have enough food and they had to be able to utilize body fat for fuel, the body knows how to turn these longer-chain fatty acids into smaller-chain ketones that are water-soluble that can cross right into the brain, and they're an amazing fuel source for the brain. And they shut down inflammation in the brain. They're epigenetic influencers, meaning that they help turn on positive genetic expression in the brain, reducing the risk of mental illness, neurodegenerative conditions, different things like that. So it's an amazing physiological state to be in. But looking at our ancestors, I mean, they weren't always, not every society was always in ketosis. And for most people, that's, it's really not what we're trying to accomplish. We're trying to, in a sense, kind of go in and out of this particular state, get the benefits when we're in, and then we come out because there are certain signals, hormonal signals that we get. We have to think about ketosis as kind of like almost like a starvation state. Mm-hmm. Now, we can mimic it and still eat lots of calories and not be starving. However, it's still telling the body that we're in a period of time of famine. And that's not a message we always want to be telling the body, particularly not for, certain demographics. So the individuals that tend to have more challenges with this, that, we need to be real careful with. Well, of course, the people that we rule out to begin with are pregnant women. It's not a goal to try to get into ketosis when you're pregnant, young children, right? High level athletes, that are exercising 3, 4, 5 hours a day. We're just not making that necessarily a goal. However, for other individuals, like for example, young, lean, menstruating females that are also very active and also have careers or families that keep them stressed and busy, it can be very challenging because women have a very sensitive hormonal system. And when their body fat drops too low, or if their body senses that they're in this time of famine for too long a period of time, it will start to shut down fertility hormones or thyroid hormone. Exactly. So for example, the big thing with ketosis is it's a way of eating. We talked about with fasting, we reduce insulin, right? We get insulin down. And so a ketogenic diet is a way of eating that keeps insulin down. That's kind of the idea of it or the goal of it. And that is great for helping turn on fat burning, for helping reduce inflammation, right? There's a lot of great benefits that come with that. However, we actually need insulin to turn inactive thyroid hormone T4 into active thyroid hormone T3. And T3 is what drives metabolic production in the cell, right? Turns on the mitochondria. Mm-hmm. So if we're telling the body we are in a time of famine, there's not enough food around because we're not getting this stimulus of insulin, then the body says, well, we need to conserve energy all around. We need to basically hibernate. So we are not going to activate the mitochondria. So we're not going to turn on, T3. So T3 can drop. And for some individuals, it can drop way too low. For other individuals, they still feel great. Like it's actually,
in fact,
can have a metabolically healthy effect on certain individuals, right?
Yeah. And I've noticed too with some labs from some athletes and stuff where their thyroid labs would look very concerning to someone who's evaluating it like me. However, they have no symptoms. They just happen to be so damn metabolically efficient that they've become sort of what I call T3 efficient, which is also kind of what happened to me. And we don't get in the weeds on this. But, I have over time, when I was maybe metabolically totally screwed up, I had to be on maybe 100 micrograms of T3, where now I'm on a very, very less than 3/4 down. I mean, so much lower, because over time, as I healed these things, as I started to become healthy, paleo, then I needed less to function. I needed less T3 to operate. So you can see those fluctuations. And then also too, so if you don't have symptoms, it's not a problem. But yeah, I always talk about it too, because keto can suppress an appetite so great. That's what's so wonderful about it. When people go to it, they're like, oh my God. But on the other hand, it can be a little bit of a slippery slope because you kind of get into that feeling. And then a lot of people make this mistake on keto, which is they're really under eating calories in general, right? So it's important to be aware of these nuances and realize where you're going with this, because you can kind of underdo it. And then again, signal these things you don't want to get signaled.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. So it can affect thyroid hormone metabolism. It can affect sex hormone metabolism. And like you were saying, one of the big caveats is just making sure you're consuming enough calories, really eating to a good satiation point, consuming enough calories. And a lot of people aren't consuming enough protein. There was a viewpoint on keto, and I thought this was the right approach as well early on, was that if you ate too much protein, it would actually kick you out of ketosis, or the protein would actually break down into glucose through a process called gluconeogenesis, which would raise your insulin. And we know today that's actually not true. So actually a higher protein, I always felt better on a higher protein ketogenic diet. It was more just
me too.
But you can't eat that much protein, right? And we know today that actually, in my opinion, a higher protein ketogenic diet is what most people respond better to. And by high protein, I'm talking about like 25 to 30% of your calories coming from protein. So normally on a ketogenic diet, they say the macros are roughly 60 to 70%, sometimes up to 80% fat. Mm-hmm. And then it's usually like 15, 20% maybe protein, and then 5% or less of carbohydrate. Right. So that's the typical macros that we were taught. And most of the original studies were done on people with epilepsy, people having seizures, because ketones are so neuroprotective. And these individuals with seizures, unfortunately, oftentimes they have a congenital issue where they can't break down sugar effectively in their brain. So they actually need this alternative fuel source, ketones, and they need it at a high level. And so for these people, they were doing studies and they showed that, like, for example, an 80% fat diet seemed to work great for them. I actually still think, I haven't done enough of these studies, but I still think that they could get results on a little bit more protein for these kids, and also adding in something like MCT oil, like a C8, pure C8 MCT oil, which turns right into ketones, to keep the ketone levels at a certain therapeutic grade. But, this is a very rare population group. And so it doesn't apply across the board. Most people are going to do better and actually get into a good state of ketosis with, roughly 60% of your calories or so coming from fat, roughly 25 to 35% coming from protein, and then, 5 to 10% coming from carbohydrates, depending on your activity level. And also, if you add in intermittent fasting, you can actually even have a greater tolerance for carbohydrates. Like at this point, I consume probably about a cup of berries every single day, and I feel great. Mm-hmm. And I actually feel like it helps me recover from exercise better, so I probably am consuming somewhere between, I don't count out my macros, but I'm consuming more than 50 grams of net carbs on a daily basis, which, they would say to get into ketosis, you really have to be under that. But because I eat my meals typically in like a 6-hour eating window, and I do one day a week where I do just one meal, because of that, I'm getting such a low insulin stimulus that my body is going back and forth between being in ketosis, and then I'll have a meal where I'll have some dark chocolate, I'll have berries, right? Different things like that, protein shake with berries and avocado and stuff. And I'll be out of ketosis, right? For a period of time, because I'll be consuming those carbohydrates. But then once I get back into my fasting window, and I usually will have, maybe some berries after dinner or something like that. But once I get back into my fasting window by like mid-morning the next day, I'm totally in ketosis, if not earlier, right? I'm not testing on a regular basis, but, I'm doing this interview right now at 11:30 Eastern time. I haven't eaten since 6:30 last night, and I feel great. I don't feel hungry at all, right? And that's a sign that my body's utilizing these ketones.
Well, I think so let's get into fasting a little bit more here. If people are like, I want to try it. What do I do? How do I start? I mean, I think obviously we know a problematic thing with lots of people when we're talking about diet or lifestyle changes, they want to just cold turkey and jump right into the shit. And that's not always the best way, because sometimes it can be a little painful, for example, I tell sugar addicts, I'm like, all right, look, maybe it's not cold turkey. We wean you off because you're going to have a little bit of like fresh coconut cream and berries every night. And it's like, kind of like, let's edge down off the real crappy sugar and kind of go there first, kind of make a plan. So if someone's eating 3 meals a day or snacking a lot, I mean, clearly if they're not on sort of an ancestral paradigm, I think, would you suggest like get fat adapted first, kind of clean up your stuff for a month and then maybe try? Because I think what happens, I mean, this is really true with everyone at the Primal Blueprint on Mark's Daily Apple who had success stories, and including myself, which is once you start to eliminate all this junk and you start to get more on an ancestral sort of food list and paradigm, you notice that you wake up not hungry anymore if you're a person that always was hungry when they woke up. So it kind of naturally happens versus trying to go, okay, well, tomorrow I'm just going to wake up and suffer through 12. Now, I did have a friend that did that. He was like, all right, I'm just going to do this and wake up and try for the first several days to not eat before 12 o'clock. Took him a few days to probably feel not hungry and things like that before finally he was good with it. So how do we go about this if we're listening and we're like, I'm on a bad train. I want to get metabolically flexible and fat adapted. What do I do first? How do I start?
Yeah, for sure. Well, there's the hard way and there's the more gradual and easier way, right? So one way to start is you could do a 5-day fast or a 3-day fast, but it's going to be painful. It's kind of like trying to get in shape. You've been sedentary and then you want to get in shape. And so you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to, run this 5K, right? Sure. You could do challenging exercise when you're sedentary, but you're going to be in a lot of pain, right? And so it's kind of the same thing here. You could do a 5-day fast, but it's going to be painful as you get your body adapted. So really this is what I talk about in my book, Keto Metabolic Breakthrough, is this kind of slow adaptation process. Well, it seems slow, but in the grand scheme of your life, it's actually very quick. Where basically you count up, you start out and you figure out what your normal carbohydrate level is, right? So let's say you're eating 250 grams of carbohydrates a day. Well, then try taking 50 grams out, for the first week. So you're keeping yourself to 200 grams of net carbs a day. And then let's say you add in some extra protein or some extra fat instead. And then the following week, you drop 50 more grams of carbohydrates. And so like every week you're dropping 50 grams until you get into kind of that zone where you're under 50 grams of net carbs. And at that period of time, now you're in a zone where you can get into ketosis. Now, for some individuals that have like kind of an underlying, they're very insulin resistant, they may need to drop it down to about 20 grams or less of net carbs. So that's possible, but we're kind of taking a gradual approach, right? So it might take 4 or 5 weeks or so to get into that state. And then we want to kind of stay in that zone for about 30 days. And then we can experiment with cycling carbs back in, right? So figuring out a good cycle where you can increase your carbs. We call it having a feast day. For example, one of the strategies is like a 5-1-1, where we do 5 days, very low carb, 1 day where you're consuming more carbohydrates, 150, maybe 200 grams of net carbs. And then 1 day where you're doing more of like like a fast, basically. You're doing one meal. So you might do a dinner to dinner fast or a lunch to lunch fast, something along those lines where you're just kind of consuming liquids, water, herbal teas, maybe black coffee in your fasting window. And you're only eating one meal on that day. And that's going to really help reset your gut. That's going to really stimulate higher levels of autophagy. When you start fasting between 20 to 24 hours in that range, 1 day every week, you're going to get a much higher level of cellular repair than if you're doing like a 16-hour fast 7 days a week, for example, right? Just kicking it in 1 day a week, just kind of pushing it 1 day a week is going to really help. But you also may need to have that feast day to tell your body, hey, we're not in a time of famine, right? It's not a long period of famine right now. We just had 1 day, no big deal, right? Now we have plenty of food. And so,
yeah, I love that strategy. I love, I think it's sustaining, it's doable. It's the least painful way to go about it. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So my favorite, so when I do my feast day, there is a, now I don't approve of all the ingredients, but hey, this is something my family enjoys. We do the Against the Grains pizza. It's a cauliflower crust, but it's got like cassava in there and some different things like that. It tastes amazing. And, to me, it's gluten-free. It's better than a lot of the other ones. That's like one of my favorite things when we have like a higher carb day.
I'll throw that out too. I love Capello's pizza. And also they have the grain-free pasta, things like that. Still has eggs and almond milk, but it really mimics the texture for exactly what you want. And again, because I've been sort of around here since the beginning of the blow up of this movement. And there are so many incredible choices out there now. There's sort of no excuse. There's everything that can mimic. They have also those against the grain rolls or French bread loaves and things like that. And while they are pricier, they do give you that texture and that feeling that you want without the crapola. So I love that suggestion. I just want to also throw this out there. I just remember, and it's so confusing, the nutrition thing, until you get to what works for you. And people are like, what do? I don't know. I'm trying this. And I think one thing that I've taken away, I don't know when you thought about this, it's, back in the day, it was like, eat the rainbow. We got to have every color on the plate. And then it feels like everybody is trying to fit in a day as much roughage of every color, you know what I mean? And it becomes, first of all, becomes a food waster, right? Because you may not be wanting that bell pepper in your salad. So, and what I've noticed over time is that I really look at it like, how does my week look? It's almost like how you were just talking about with the flexibility of the carbs throughout the week and kind of how we're doing that. I feel the same way about food. So there might be a day when I eat 0 vegetables. Is that going to freaking kill me? No, because that week I already had one thing at chart or, so I kind of like to look at it like, how does my week look? I don't need chard, Brussels sprouts, and every vegetable in every, day of my life. And so that's kind of my philosophy. And it's made it so much easier because then I'll be like, all right, well, I haven't had Swiss chard for a while. Hey, that's a green thing. Let me go shove some of that in there. Or, okay. And so I'll try to eat like maybe one vegetable a day, but maybe I don't, maybe there's a day where I don't have any, and that's okay too. Like you said, you could have a day where you're kind of carnivore, a day where some days it's very rare where I'm like, ooh, I don't want animal protein, which is weird for me, but I follow it, Yeah.
So, this is like a principle of diet variation.
Right.
Which actually is a hormetic stressor on the body. So if the body is used to eating one particular type of food, it's one of those things where it's not necessarily bad for it. However, your microbiome, actually forcing in different adaptations into your microbiome can be really, really beneficial. So consuming foods that you don't normally eat, different types of, whether it's plant foods, meats, different things like that, and just kind of changing it up can actually have a very, very beneficial effect. You think about our ancestors, they would eat by the seasons, right? So whatever was in season. So there would be a lot of variation that would take place. Sometimes it was, they would only eat meat for a period of time. Sometimes it was very little meat for periods of time, right? So that the body is made to adapt, and forcing in adaptation is actually really healthy as long as the body is in a place where it can adapt and be resilient enough. For example, somebody that has really damaged gut lining, and they have, massive bacterial overgrowth in their small intestine, we may not want to force in a whole lot of vegetables, a whole lot of fiber, a whole lot of higher FODMAP types of foods, because it's causing more and more and more inflammation. So depending on your level of resilience, right? Somebody that has really low stomach acid, or maybe like H. pylori or stomach ulcer or something like that, they may need to go on a lower meat diet for a period of time to allow the ulcer to heal, for example. Depending on your baseline level of resilience, stress resilience, and health, adding in more variation can actually be really beneficial.
Awesome. Tell us, okay, you've got 2 books, but also you've got, some wonderful free stuff. You've got a cellular autophagy and metabolic reset recipe book, and a, free metabolic healing masterclass, and lots of things. So tell us how we can benefit from you. I'm assuming we can find your books under your name, Dr. Jockers on Amazon, but give us how we can work with you. Do you work with people one-on-one, or are you just providing information and masterclasses and courses? Like, let us know how we can benefit from,
Yeah, well, of course, you can go to my website, drjockers.com, also on YouTube, social media. And we do have a great health coaching team that I've trained. We do functional medicine virtually all over, the world. Well, I should say functional health coaching all over the world.
And great health coaching. Medicine.
Yeah. We don't prescribe medicine, and we're not licensed to practice medicine or anything like that. But we're great at helping people navigate their nutritional journey, help with assessing labs, and providing nutraceuticals to help support where they need support. And so we do that, again, all over the world, via, Zoom or telephone or whatever it is. And then, you could find my website. It's real popular. It's drjockers.com. We put out lots of great content there. So you can look at a lot of the content that we talked about here.
Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your wisdom, and honestly, just promoting something that is so important for all of us to kind of jump on and experience and adopt into our life. Is there anything you'd like to leave our audience with, or thoughts as we close up here?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we talked about fasting. It's one of my favorite topics. And I really think fasting is the most ancient, inexpensive, and powerful healing strategy known to mankind, meaning that, it's something that all of our ancestors have done. So it's built into our genetic blueprint. It obviously doesn't cost us anything. And it's really, the way that our body naturally heals itself, right? And we have the greatest healing power in the world within us. And so we just need the right environment to allow our body to heal. So implementing some level of fasting, and you do need to tailor it to yourself. And you may need coaching depending on your, underlying baseline health, on how to practice that. But it is revolutionary. I've seen it impact so many people's lives for the better. So it's not something you need to be scared of. It's something you want to embrace. And all of us should be living some sort of a fasting lifestyle where we're incorporating periods of time where we're doing a little bit more of this kind of time restricted feeding, intermittent fasting style approach for, different periods of time to help enhance the healing process. And I didn't mention my book, The Fasting Transformation. You can find that, where I talk you through all of it and really how to customize the right fasting strategy. So we have a quiz that you take that helps you understand kind of your fasting, your underlying fasting fitness level. And this is a quiz that you can take as you continually get your body more metabolically flexible. So that way you understand really what the best fasting window is going to be for you. So we have that in the book and all different types of strategies. So you can find it. It's called The Fasting Transformation. It's on Amazon.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us. And for everyone else, we'll see you next time. Hey listeners, over the years, a ton of companies have approached me to collaborate, but I will only promote companies whose products I believe in and that I actually use and consume on a regular basis. So let me tell you about some of my favorite companies that I can offer you discounts for. Rep Provisions, an amazing company doing incredible things for our planet, topsoil, and animals with regenerative agriculture, and it's my #1 source for quality pasture-raised meat and chicken. Visit repprovisions.com and use code L15 for 15% off. I'm also obsessed with a company called Carnivore Crisps. They make a lean, all-natural, and delicious alternative to conventional snacking, made with just real meat and real salt. Totally addictive, and my favorite ones are the beef brisket and the ribeye. Visit carnivorecrisps.com and use code PALEO10 for 10% off. I also love and regularly use Paleo Valley products. They make amazing supplements and delicious paleo products. I use the superfood greens powder, grass-fed beef sticks, the organ complex, and their bone broth bars. I love the lemon and apple. I also use their essential C complex and more. Visit paleovalley.com/promos/Elle Russ for 15% off. I also love Primal Kitchen. They make delicious paleo-approved, gluten-free, grain-free, soy-free, and no refined sugar products, and I use them daily, from their collagen powders and sauces and marinades to their avocado and olive oil. So good, so healthy. Visit primalkitchen.com and use code L10 for 10% off. I also love paleo powder and use it almost on everything I cook. They make incredible seasoning blends, and they also have these incredible grain-free coatings that feel just like crispy breadings that you would have had prior to knowing that there's another way. So visit paleopowder.com and use code L15 for 15% off.